So this is a Minecraft world I've had for about a year and a half, and I decided to hop on again and figured, hey, I'd record it, tell you guys some scary stories. So yeah, enjoy. I've been a police officer for about 8 years now, and in that time, I've dealt with drunk drivers, domestic calls, break-ins, pretty much everything you'd expect. But the one call that still messes with me happened on a random Tuesday night during a slow shift. It was around 2:30 a.m. when dispatch sent out a welfare check. A woman had called saying her neighbor hadn't been seen in a few days, and there was a strange smell coming from the house. Nothing unusual about that type of call. Usually it ends with someone out of town, or maybe worst case, someone passed away inside. I pulled up to the house alone. It was a small, one-story place with no lights on, and the yard looked like it hadn't been taken care of in months. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time, but there was still nothing. Just as I was about to walk around the side of the house, I heard something from inside. A slow dragging sound across the floor, and then silence. I knocked again and announced myself. Police department. Another dragging sound. Then the door handle slowly turned. The door opened maybe 3 inches, and a man was standing there. He was tall, extremely thin, and shirtless. His hair was greasy and hanging in front of his face. The first thing I noticed was his eyes. They looked wide and kind of unfocused, like he hadn't slept for weeks. He didn't say anything, he just stared at me. I explained that I got a call from a neighbor and asked if everything was alright. He didn't answer and just kept staring. After a few seconds, he finally said, very quietly, "You shouldn't be here." Now, people say weird things all the time during welfare checks, especially if they're dealing with mental illness, so I kept my tone calm. I asked if anyone else was in the house. He didn't answer that either. Instead, he slowly opened the door wider and stepped back into the darkness of the house. And then he said something that immediately made my stomach drop. He said, "Come look." The inside of the house was pitch black except for a faint light coming from a hallway. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me. It was awful. Not just trash or rot, but something so much worse. I asked the guy again if anyone else was there. He pointed down the hallway, so I walked down toward the light. Behind me, I could hear the man's bare feet slowly following me on the floor. When I reached the end of the hallway, I turned the corner into the kitchen, and I immediately saw what the smell was. In the middle of the kitchen floor was a dead dog. It looked like it had been there for days. I turned around to ask the man what happened to it, but when I turned around, he was right behind me, way closer than I expected, and close enough that I could smell his breath. He was smiling, but not a normal smile either. It was this huge, stretched grin that didn't match his eyes at all. And he said, "Do you want to see the other one?" My brain immediately went into overdrive. Other one? I asked him what that meant. He slowly raised his arm and pointed toward a closed basement door in the kitchen, and then said, "She's quieter now." At that point, I stepped back and told him to stay where he was. I radioed for backup immediately. The guy didn't resist, and he didn't move. He just stood there, smiling at me the entire time. When other officers arrived, we detained him and opened the basement door. And we found something down there that I will never forget. Sitting in the corner of the basement was a woman tied to a chair, and alive, but barely conscious. She had been missing for 4 days. Turns out the guy had kidnapped her from a gas station parking lot. But the part that still bothers me is what happened as they were putting him in the squad car. One of the officers asked him why he kept her alive. The man looked at him, completely calm, and said, "Because the dog stopped making noise too soon." Then he started laughing, and I can honestly say that in my entire career, I have never heard a laugh that sounded less human than that one. My sister and I booked a week-long cruise after she graduated college. It was supposed to be one of those carefree trips where you eat too much, sleep late, and spend every night wandering the ship. For the first few days, that's exactly what it was. But on the fourth night, something happened that still makes me uneasy anytime I see a cruise ship. It started around 1:30 in the morning. My sister had already gone to bed, but I wasn't tired yet, so I decided to walk around the ship for a bit. Late at night, the cruise felt completely different. Quiet hallways, dim lights, and the constant low hum of the engines. I eventually ended up on one of the upper passenger decks where most cabins were. The hallway was empty, completely silent except for the faint creaking of the ship moving through the water. As I walked past the rows of doors, I noticed something odd about one of them. Cabin 943. The door was slightly open, not wide open, but just cracked enough to notice. At first, I assumed someone had stepped out quickly or housekeeping had forgotten to close it properly. But as I passed it, I heard something inside. A very quiet voice, and it sounded like someone whispering. I slowed down for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then I heard something else, a woman's voice. But it wasn't talking, it sounded like muffled crying. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer to the door and knocked slightly. Hello? The whispering inside stopped immediately. Then the crying stopped too. The cabin went completely silent. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a man's voice from the inside, calm, a little too calm, saying everything's fine. The way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then the door slowly started to close. Not slam, just gently swing shut until it clicked. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. So I went down to the guest services desk and told them what I'd heard. They thanked me and said security would check it out. I assumed that would be the end of it, but about 30 minutes later, I was back in our cabin when I heard something in the hallway. Running. Very heavy footsteps and then shouting. I opened the door just in time to see two security officers sprint past. They stopped at cabin 943. One of them knocked loudly. Security, open the door. But there was no response. They knocked again, harder this time, but there was still nothing. Then one of them used a key card and pushed the door open. The moment the door swung open, both of them stepped back like they hit a wall. Even from down the hallway, I could hear one of them swear under his breath. Within minutes, more security and crew members arrived. Then medical staff. The hallway was quickly blocked off and everyone was told to return to their cabins. The next morning, the rumor spread through the ship almost instantly. A woman had been found in that cabin, dead. She had boarded the cruise 2 days earlier with a man who claimed to be her boyfriend. But after the discovery, security couldn't find him anywhere on the ship, which was strange because cruise ships keep track of everyone who boards or leaves. Eventually, they reviewed the security cameras, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. Around 2 a.m., shortly after I reported the cabin, cameras caught the man walking calmly through one of the lower crew corridors. He was carrying a large suitcase. The footage showed him dragging it onto an empty deck at the back of the ship. He looked around for a few seconds, then he lifted the suitcase over the railing and pushed it into the ocean. After that, he walked back inside the ship like nothing had happened. When authorities checked the passenger list, they discovered something terrifying. The man somehow hadn't been registered on the cruise at all. He had boarded using someone else's key card during one of the port stops, meaning he had been walking around that ship for days, without anyone realizing he wasn't supposed to be there. They eventually caught him when the cruise returned to port after a deep search. But there's one part of the story that still makes me uncomfortable. During the investigation, the crew confirmed something. When security entered cabin 943, they only found one body, the woman. The suitcase the man threw into the ocean was never recovered, and no one ever figured out what they had put inside. It was a Thursday night in late October, the kind where the air feels colder than it should and the house settles louder than usual. My parents had gone out of town for their anniversary, and my older sister was staying at a friend's dorm 2 hours away. For the first time ever, I had the entire house to myself, and at first it felt great. I ordered pizza, turned every light on downstairs, put something loud on the TV just to fill the silence. Our house is a 2-story place with a long hallway upstairs. My room is at the very end, facing the backyard. The staircase opens directly into the living room. Around 9:30 it started raining, not pouring, just steady, enough that you could hear it hitting the windows in soft, constant taps. By 10:15 I was upstairs in my room playing on my phone. The house had that hollow feeling it only gets when no one else is home. Every little creak felt amplified. At 10:37 I heard the first noise. It was faint, a soft metallic rattle. I paused my video and listened, but there was nothing. I told myself it was probably the wind hitting the trash cans outside. We keep them near the side of the gate, which sometimes bangs if it's not latched tight. I went back to my phone, then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a rattle. It was 3 distinct sounds, a click, followed by a pause, followed by another click and another pause, which ended with one last click. It sounded exactly like someone was trying the front door. My stomach dropped. I froze in my bed, staring at my bedroom door like it might move. I waited. The rain kept tapping, but 30 seconds passed, and then I felt my phone buzz in my hand. I nearly threw it across the room. It was a notification from our Ring doorbell app. My parents had shared access with me just in case, and it said motion detected at the front door. I felt my heart beat in my throat. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to confirm what I already thought, but I did. The screen loaded slowly, like it was intentionally dragging it out. At first, I saw nothing but rain streaking the lens. Then the camera adjusted. There was a man standing on our porch. He wasn't facing the camera. He was standing sideways with his hood up and his hands in his pockets. Just standing there. Not knocking, not moving, just standing. The timestamp showed he'd been there for 18 seconds already, and I held my breath. After about 10 more seconds, he slowly stepped closer to the door. He leaned down slightly, and then I saw his hand reach for the doorknob. Click. The same sound I heard upstairs. He twisted it once, then twice, and then he stopped. He stood still for another few seconds. Then he turned his head directly toward the camera. Even though the rain was distorting the image, I could still see his eyes. They weren't surprised, he wasn't confused, but he looked calm, like he knew something. Then he did something that made my entire body go cold. He stepped backward off the porch and disappeared from the camera's view. Not walking down the steps, not crossing the yard, just stepping slightly out of frame. Then the motion alert ended. I immediately locked my bedroom door, and my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the little twist lock twice. I told myself I should call the police, but what would I say? There was a guy on my porch. He hadn't broken in, and he hadn't even knocked. I just kept staring at the Ring app. No new notifications. And then 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And then the rain started to get heavier as the night went on, and I convinced myself he'd probably been at the wrong house, maybe drunk, maybe confused. I started to calm down, but then I heard something downstairs. A sound that didn't belong. Not rain, not a house creaking. It was slow and heavy. It was like footsteps. One and then another, coming from the kitchen. And my blood turned to ice when I finally realized they were footsteps. The kitchen is at the back of the house, and there's a sliding glass door that leads to the backyard. And then I remembered we never lock it. We never lock it because we never use it, and I never checked it. The footsteps moved from the tile to the hardwood, to the kitchen, into the dining room, then to the living room, and then they were directly beneath me. I covered my mouth to stop myself from breathing too loud. The TV downstairs was still on, and the sound of whatever show I left playing mixed with the rain and those slow, deliberate steps. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicked, he was walking like he belonged there. Then the footsteps stopped, directly at the bottom of the stairs. The staircase creaks when anyone goes up. Every single step makes noise. There's no way to be quiet on it. I stared at my bedroom door, waiting. The house went completely silent except for the TV. Then there was a creak. It was him stepping on the first step, and I felt tears building in my eyes. Then he stepped on the second step. They were all slow and measured steps, like he was trying to listen between each one. I grabbed my phone and finally decided to dial 911, and I whispered as quietly as I could to the dispatcher that there's someone in my house and that I'm upstairs and alone. The operator told me to stay on the line, and the stairs continued with their creaks. Each step was closer, and then they stopped. He was halfway up, and just stopped. I couldn't hear breathing, I couldn't hear movement, just silence. The operator asked if I could still hear him, and I whispered yes. Then there was another creak, and then 2 more, and he reached the top of the stairs. The upstairs hallway floor is carpeted, so you couldn't hear any creaks. There was no warning, it was just soft movement. My bedroom was at the very end, and I heard the faintest brush of fabric against the wall. He was walking down the hallway, checking each door. He started with my sister's room, then the bathroom, then the spare room. I heard doorknobs gently turning. He was testing them, and being very careful. He didn't want to alert me, and he thought I didn't know. Then his footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stared at the handle and it was completely still. For a moment, I wondered if maybe he'd keep walking, or maybe he'd assume no one was in here. Then the doorknob moved, slowly and carefully. He twisted it once and it didn't open, so he twisted it again and harder. It was still locked and there was a long pause. Then something slightly scratched at the door, not aggressively, not pounding, just a fingernail dragging softly down the wood. The operator whispered that officers were 2 minutes away, but those 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The scratching stopped, and then he knocked. 3 soft taps. And then the calmest, most controlled voice I've ever heard, he said, "I know you're in there." I stopped breathing entirely. He wasn't yelling, and he wasn't threatening. He sounded patient, like he had all the time in the world. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Then he said something that made my entire body go numb. "I saw you watching me through the camera." The Ring app. He knew. He knew I'd seen him. Before I could process that, red and blue lights flashed through my bedroom window from outside. It was the police. Finally, the hallway erupted in sudden movement. They were fast footsteps, and he wasn't trying to be careful anymore. He just ran. I heard him sprint down the stairs, slam something, and then the back door crashed open. Officers stormed in seconds later, and they searched the house, the yard, and the neighborhood, but they never found him. But here's the part that still keeps me awake. When the police reviewed the Ring footage, they told me something I didn't see that night. When he stepped off the porch camera, he didn't leave. Another camera angle from our neighbor's house caught him. He walked along the side of our house and went to the backyard. And then he crouched directly beneath my bedroom window for 12 minutes, just sitting there, looking up and waiting. He wasn't surprised I was home. He was making sure I was. And now I don't stay home alone anymore. And every time it rains, I swear I can still hear 3 soft clicks at the door. The first night at the cabin always feels different from the rest. My parents said it was just because we weren't used to the quiet yet, but I swear the woods around our cabin had their own kind of silence, the kind that made every little sound feel too loud. We had been driving for hours through winding mountain roads before we finally reached the place. The cabin sat by itself at the end of a narrow dirt path, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the sky. My dad always loved it out there because there was no cell service, no neighbors, and nothing but trees. The perfect place to unplug, he said, but I wasn't so sure. That night after dinner, my parents sat inside playing cards while my sister watched a movie. I stepped outside onto the porch because it felt stuffy in the cabin. The air outside was cold and it smelled like wet wood and pine needles. The woods were almost completely black, and the only light came from the porch lamp and a thin slice of moon above the trees. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance, and occasionally I could hear the creek that ran behind the cabin. But then I heard something else, a footstep. It was faint, like someone stepping carefully on leaves, but I froze. At first I thought it was probably a deer or a raccoon. We saw animals out there all the time. But then the sound came again. It sounded slow and almost careful, like someone trying not to be heard. I leaned over the porch railing and looked toward the tree line. The light from the porch only reached a few yards before everything faded into darkness. "Hello?" I called. The sound stopped immediately, and nothing moved. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling kind of stupid for getting nervous over an animal. I turned to go back inside when I heard something that made my stomach drop. A whistle. It was soft, almost playful, and it came from the woods. I spun back around, staring into the darkness, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Dad?" I called, thinking maybe he had come outside around the side of the cabin. But the door behind me opened and my dad stepped onto the porch. "You yelling for me?" I looked back towards the trees. "No, I thought that was you." He looked out into the woods for a moment, then shrugged, probably a bird or something. But I knew what I heard. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked and popped the way old wood always does. But every little noise made me sit up in bed, and around 2 a.m. I finally drifted off. But then something woke me up. It was a tapping sound. I lifted my head slowly, and the sound was coming from the window next to my bed. For a second, I convinced myself it was just a branch blowing in the wind, but when I looked outside, the trees were completely still. There were then 3 slow knocks, and my chest tightened as I slowly leaned toward the window. The glass reflected my face faintly, but beyond it was nothing but black woods. And then I saw it. A figure just standing outside the porch light, too tall, too thin, and completely still. I couldn't see its face clearly, but its head was tilted slightly, like it was studying the cabin. It was watching, and I held my breath, and then the tapping stopped. The figure didn't move for a long time, but then slowly it raised one arm and pointed directly at my window. I scrambled backward off the bed and ran into my parents' room. My dad grabbed a flashlight and rifle he kept for bears. We went back to the porch together. But when he shined the light into the woods, there was nothing there. No footprints, no animals, no person, just the quiet trees. My dad said I must have been dreaming. But the next morning, when we went around the side of the cabin, he stopped suddenly. Right beneath my window, carved into the wooden wall of the cabin, there were 3 deep scratch marks, and below them, someone had carved a single word: found. When I was 16, I started babysitting for families in my neighborhood to make some extra money. Most of the jobs were easy: watch a movie with the kids, make them dinner, put them to bed, and wait for the parents to get home. But one night still bothers me, even years later. It was a Friday night when a woman named Mrs. Keller asked my mom if I could babysit her son. They had just moved into the neighborhood a few weeks earlier, so I had never met them before. The job seemed simple. Just watch their 7-year-old son, Evan, from about 7 p.m. until midnight. When I got there, the parents seemed normal enough. Mrs. Keller showed me where the snacks were, told me Evan's bedtime was around 9:30, and said he usually watched TV before bed. Before they left, though, Mr. Keller added one strange thing. He said, "Evan has a really active imagination. If he tells you anything weird tonight, just ignore it." I remember laughing awkwardly and saying okay. After they left, Evan and I watched a movie in the living room. At first, he seemed like a normal kid, quiet but polite. About halfway through the movie, he turned to me and asked, "Do you want to see the game I play in the basement?" I told him maybe later, because basements always kind of creep me out. But he didn't push it. About 10 minutes later, he asked me again. "Please, I can only play it when my parents aren't home." That made me feel a little weird, so I asked him what the game was. And he said, "You hide upstairs, and he tries to find you." I laughed nervously and asked, "Who?" Evan looked toward the hallway that led to the basement door, and he said, "The man that lives down there." I immediately assumed this was the active imagination thing his dad mentioned. So I said something like, "That's a pretty scary game," but Evan didn't smile. He just looked confused and said, "It's not a game for him." That made the whole room feel different somehow. I quickly changed the subject and told Evan it was time to get ready for bed. He didn't argue, which surprised me. After brushing his teeth and putting on pajamas, I tucked him into bed. He asked if I would leave the hallway light on, which I did. Around 10 p.m., I went back to the living room and started scrolling on my phone. Everything was quiet, a little too quiet. About 20 minutes later, I hear something. A soft creaking sound. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then I heard it again. It sounded like it was coming from the basement door in the hallway. I stared down the hallway for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was nothing. And then I heard something else. A slow thump. Like someone gently hitting wood from the other side. My heart immediately started pounding, and I stood up and walked halfway down the hallway. The basement door was at the end, right next to Evan's bedroom. And the light I had left on was flickering slightly. And that's when Evan's bedroom door opened slowly. He stepped out, rubbing his eyes, and in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "You shouldn't stand there." I asked him why. He looked towards the basement door and then back at me, and he said, "Because if he hears you, he thinks it's time to play." Right as he said that, the basement door handle slowly turned. I grabbed Evan and pulled him back into his room, slamming the door behind us, and I immediately called 911. While we waited, the sounds from the hallway got worse. Footsteps, heavy and slow, walking around the living room. The police arrived about 6 minutes later, which felt like an hour. When they searched the house, they found the basement door open, and the basement window was completely shattered. Someone had been living down there. There were blankets, food wrappers, and empty water bottles hidden behind the furnace. The police think the person had been coming up into the house at night when the family was asleep. But the part that still haunts me is something Evan said later while talking to officers. He looked at me and whispered, "I told you he likes the hiding game." And then he pointed towards the basement and said, "But usually he finds me faster." This happened when I was 19 during a summer trip to the coast with 3 of my friends. We rented a cheap beach house for a week before college started again. Nothing fancy, just a small place a couple streets from the beach. The kind of town that was packed during the day but completely dead at night. On our 3rd night there, we decided to walk down to the beach around 11:30 p.m. The plan was to just sit by the water, listen to music, and hang out for a bit. But when we got there, the beach was empty. No bonfires, no other groups, just the sound of waves and wind. We sat there for maybe an hour before 2 of my friends said they were tired and wanted to head back to the house. My friend Tyler and I stayed behind. We kept talking and joking around, just watching the waves. Eventually, Tyler said he had to go to the bathroom and was going to run back to the public restrooms by the boardwalk. He told me he'd be back in a minute, so I stayed sitting on the sand. A few minutes after he left, I noticed something further down the beach, someone walking. At first, I thought it was Tyler coming back from the boardwalk, but the person was moving parallel to the water, not toward me. Just slowly walking along the shoreline, but the weird part was how slowly they were moving. Like they weren't really going anywhere, just pacing. I didn't think much of it until they suddenly stopped and then turned. He started walking straight toward me. Even from a distance, I could tell something about the way they moved felt wrong. Their arms barely swung and their head was tilted slightly downward like they were staring at the sand. I figured they were just another late-night beach walker, but as they got closer, I realized something. They weren't looking at the water. They were looking directly at me. My stomach dropped a little, so I stood up pretending like I was about to leave anyway. The person stopped again. Now they were maybe 40 yards away, just standing there watching me. I couldn't see their face clearly in the dark, but I could tell it was a man. He looked older, maybe late 40s or even 50s. I waved awkwardly, like you do when you accidentally make eye contact with a stranger, but he didn't wave back or even move at all. He then very slowly took steps toward me again. That's when I decided I'd have enough beach time for the night. I started walking toward the boardwalk where Tyler had gone. But after about 10 seconds, I heard footsteps behind me crunching on the sand slowly and steady. They were matching my pace, and I turned around, and the man was closer now, maybe 25 yards away, still walking directly behind me, but not running, not calling out, just following. My heart started racing, so I picked up the pace, but so did he. Not running, but definitely walking faster. That's when Tyler suddenly appeared around the top of the beach path near the boardwalk. He yelled, "Dude, you coming?" The man stopped instantly, like someone hit pause on him. I turned around again and saw him standing there in the darkness, completely still. Tyler noticed him too and asked if I knew the guy, but I said no, and we both started heading up toward the boardwalk together. When we looked back again, the man was gone. Not walking away, just gone. We assumed he'd gone down the beach in the other direction, but the next morning, everything changed. When we went out for breakfast, the diner TV was showing the local news. It had said a woman had gone missing the night before. She was last seen walking on the same stretch of beach around midnight. The police believed someone had followed her, but the worst part was when they showed the security camera image from a boardwalk restaurant. In the background of the footage, about 30 seconds after the woman walked past the camera, a man walked by behind her. Same height, same thin frame, and same slow walk. And the same thing that made my skin crawl the night before. His head was tilted slightly downward like he was staring at the sand, but his eyes were pointed straight ahead following her. Tyler and I never went back to that beach at night again. And to this day, I still think about something that could have gone very differently. Because if Tyler hadn't come back from the bathroom when he did, I probably would have been the last person left on that beach. When I was 19, a group of my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned hospital just outside our town. It had been closed for almost 15 years. Officially, the hospital shut down because the newer medical center across the county had replaced it. But like most abandoned places, the real reputation came from the rumors. People said weird things happened there. Security guards would quit after a few weeks. Construction crews hired to demolish parts of it had refused to work inside after dark. Stuff like that. None of us had believed any of it. There were 4 of us that night. Me, my friend Ryan, our buddy Cole, and Ryan's cousin Matt. We went around 11 p.m. because we figured there'd be less chance of security showing up. The hospital sat behind a rusted chain-link fence at the end of a cracked service road. The building itself was huge, 6 floors tall, with dark windows staring out like empty eyes. Ryan had been there once before and knew a way in through the emergency entrance. The glass doors were shattered, and someone had bent the metal frame enough that you could slip through. The second we stepped inside, the smell hit us. That weird abandoned building smell, dust, mildew, and something chemical lingering in the air. Our flashlights lit up a waiting room filled with overturned chairs and broken glass. Old posters about flu shots and heart health were still hanging on the walls, faded and peeling. It honestly felt less creepy than we expected. At first, it was almost interesting. We walked past the reception desk and into a hallway lined with patient rooms. Some still had hospital beds inside, others had filing cabinets tipped over with papers scattered everywhere. But the weirdest part was how quiet it was. Hospitals are usually full of noise, machines beeping, people talking, carts rolling down hallways. But here, it was just silence. Our footsteps echoed through the entire building. Ryan suggested we check out the upper floors because apparently the surgery wing was on the third floor. So we found the main staircase and started heading up. The stairwell was pitch black, and every step made this hollow metal sound that echoed through the concrete walls. When we reached the third floor, the atmosphere immediately felt different. I can't really explain why, it just did. The hallway lights obviously didn't work, so our flashlights cut through rows of empty rooms and old medical equipment. Some of the doors had little windows in them, so nurses could check on patients. We passed what looked like operating rooms with big surgical lights hanging from the ceiling. Cole joked, "Imagine doing surgery in here and the power goes out." Matt laughed and said, "You just leave the patient there and run." But the joke stopped pretty quickly, because about halfway down the hallway, Ryan suddenly stopped walking. "What?" I asked. He turned and pointed behind us. "Did you hear that?" We all stood there for a second. At first, nothing, and then we heard it. A sound coming from somewhere deeper in the floor, a metallic clatter, like something had fallen onto the tile. We all looked at each other. Matt immediately said, "Someone else is here." That seemed like the most logical explanation. Places like that attract urban explorers all the time. So Ryan called out, "Hello?" His voice echoed down the hallway and disappeared into the darkness, but there was no answer. We just kept walking. But now we were paying way more attention to everything around us. About 30 feet down, we came across something strange. One of the hospital beds was sitting in the middle of the hallway. Not against the wall, right in the center, like it was almost placed. It didn't look like it had been dragged there recently. The wheels were half rusted and the dust covered the frame. But it definitely didn't belong there. Cole walked over and pushed it slightly. The wheels squeaked loudly as it moved a few inches. "Probably some kids messing around," he said. But right as he said that, we heard another sound. This one was closer, a slow rolling noise, like wheels turning on the tile. The four of us immediately turned our flashlights down the hallway behind us. But there was nothing, just a long corridor stretching back toward the stairwell. Ryan said quietly, "Tell me that was one of you." No one answered, because none of us had moved. Then the rolling sound happened again, except this time it was coming from in front of us, and it was getting closer. We all turned our lights the other direction, and for a second the hallway looked empty. Then Matt whispered, "What the hell?" About 20 feet in front of us, something moved in the beam of our flashlights. It was another hospital bed, and it was slowly rolling across the hallway. No one was pushing it. No one was anywhere near it. But it kept moving until it gently bumped into the opposite wall. The wheels made a soft metallic click as they stopped, and nobody said a word. Finally, Cole muttered, "Okay, that's weird." Ryan took a step forward like he was trying to see if there was some slope in the floor or something that made it roll. That's when we heard the third sound. This one made all of us freeze. It came from behind us. It was a door opening. Not creaking, not slowly drifting open, but opening fast. We all spun around. One of the patient room doors was wide open now, but the thing that made it worse was that we had walked past it earlier and the door had been closed. The room behind it was completely dark, and Ryan whispered we should go. Nobody argued. We started walking back toward the stairwell, and at first we were trying not to panic, but then something happened that changed everything. From somewhere down the hallway behind us, we heard the rolling sound again, except this time it wasn't slow. It sounded like multiple wheels moving quickly across the tile, like several beds being pushed at once. And they were coming straight toward us, and that's when we ran. We sprinted down the hallway toward the stairwell door. Our flashlights were bouncing everywhere, barely lighting the path in front of us. Behind us, the rolling noise got louder and louder. Metal wheels rattling across the tile, fast, way too fast. Ryan reached the stairwell first and shoved the door open. We all rushed inside and slammed it behind us. The sound stopped instantly. Just silence again. None of us spoke while we ran down the stairs. We didn't stop until we were back outside in the parking lot. Ryan jumped in the car and started the engine immediately. As we drove away, Cole finally said what we were all thinking. Okay, explain the beds. But nobody could. But the part that still bothers me the most happened about 10 minutes later. When we stopped at a gas station, Matt looked down at his shoe and said, "Guys, what is this?" There was something stuck to the bottom of it. A long strip of yellow tape. The kind that hospitals use to label equipment. Written on it in faded black marker were 2 words. "Don't move." And the tape was still sticky, which meant it hadn't been sitting in that hospital for 15 years. It had been placed there recently.